The coffee pot was heavy in her hand, the handle slick with condensation from the hot diner air. That was the last normal thing she felt. Two men filled the doorway, their cheap suits stretched too tight across their shoulders, making them look like overstuffed sausages in bad casing. They were hunters. She knew it the way a mouse knows the shadow of a hawk. They were not looking at the specials board or the dessert case. They were scanning the room, their eyes flat and predatory. Their gaze swept past her and locked on the man in the corner booth. The man in the perfectly tailored dark suit who had been nursing a single black coffee for the last hour, still and silent as a statue. He had not looked up from his cup once. Until now. He lifted his head slowly, and his eyes, the color of storm clouds, met hers across the room. There was no panic in them. There was only a flicker of something cold and absolute. His voice was a low command that somehow cut through the clatter of plates and conversation. "You're in danger. Walk over here. Pretend I'm your dad." For a frozen second, Ava's feet were rooted to the worn linoleum. Her brain struggled to connect the words to the reality of the situation. Her father was a retired postal worker in Arizona. This man was something else entirely. The scent of sandalwood and something faintly metallic, like cold steel, seemed to reach her even from across the room. But the two men by the door had started to move, weaving between tables with a purpose that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She had a choice. A terrible, split-second choice. Trust the two obvious threats, or trust the one coiled predator in the corner. She chose the corner. Her legs moved before her mind caught up, her waitress shoes squeaking softly on the floor. She kept her eyes on him, on the carved stillness of his face. He looked old enough to be her father, if her father had spent his life in boardrooms and back alleys, earning the faint, silvery scar that cut through one dark eyebrow. She reached the booth. The worn vinyl was cool against the back of her legs. She forced a smile, a bright, brittle thing she hoped looked real. "Dad," she said, her voice a little too high. "I thought you were going to be late. Did you order yet?" The man's eyes never left hers. There was an unnerving approval in their depths. "Just waiting for you, sweetheart," he said. His voice was gravelly, a low rumble that vibrated through the tabletop. He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Seat." Ava slid into the booth, her apron bunching up around her waist. She placed the coffee pot on the table with a hand that trembled only slightly. The two men were closer now. They stopped a few feet away, their bulk casting a shadow over the table. "Moretti," the taller one said. It was not a question. The man across from Ava did not look at them. He looked at her. "Get yourself a coffee, Ava. It's been a long day." He knew her name. It was on her name tag, but the way he said it felt possessive. Personal. It sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the unnerving focus of his attention. The shorter man leaned forward, resting his knuckles on their table. His hands were thick, the nails dirty. "We got business with you." "I'm having lunch with my daughter," the man said, his tone unchanging. "As you can see, we're busy." He finally turned his head, a slow, deliberate movement. The look he gave them was not angry. It was worse. It was dismissive. The look of a king swatting away a fly. "Leave." The two men exchanged a glance. She could see the conflict in their faces. They were dogs on a leash, and the man holding it had told them to fetch. But the man in the booth with her was a wolf, and he was telling them to heel. "Falcone wants to see you," the tall one insisted, but his voice had lost its edge. "Tell Falcone if he wants to see me, he knows where my office is. He does not send his errand boys to interrupt my family." The word family was spoken with a weight that made the air feel thick. He turned his gaze back to Ava, and the world narrowed to the space between them. "Isn't that right?" She had to answer. The silence stretched, thin and fragile. She swallowed, the sound loud in her own ears. "That's right," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "We never get to see him. He's always working," she was ad-libbing, pulling details from a life that wasn't hers. "Mom's going to be so happy you made it." It was the mom that did it. The shorter one straightened up, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. This was a messy, public place.
A daughter.
A wife mentioned.
It was complicated now.
It wasn't clean. He grunted. This ain't over, Moretti. They turned and walked away, their menace deflating with every step. The bell over the door chimed as they left, and the normal sounds of the diner rushed back in to fill the void. Ava's breath came out in a shaky gasp. She felt like she had been holding it for a year. The man, Moretti, watched them go. He remained perfectly still until their car pulled away from the curb. Only then did he relax, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way so subtle she would have missed it if she had not been watching him so intently. He slid $100 bill from a clip in his pocket and placed it on the table.
For the coffee, he said.
His eyes met hers again, and the coldness was back, a shudder dropping into place. And for your performance. You did well. Who are you? She whispered, her hands clenched in her lap. Someone you don't want to know, he replied. He stood, his tall frame unfolding from the booth. He was bigger than she had realized, broad-shouldered and imposing. The suit, which had looked expensive before, now looked like armor. Be careful, Ava. Go straight home after your shift. Don't talk to strangers. The advice was so paternal, so absurdly normal after what had just happened, that she almost laughed. But there was no humor in his face. He was utterly serious. Then he was gone, leaving nothing behind but the crisp bill and the lingering scent of sandalwood and danger. Ava stayed in the booth for a long time, the $100 bill feeling like a brand against the tabletop. She told herself it was over. A freak occurrence. A story she would tell her friends, sanitizing the terror until it was just a strange anecdote about a weird day at work. She told herself she would never see him again. But as she cashed out her tables at the end of her shift, a cold knot of certainty formed in her stomach. Men like that did not just happen. And danger, once it knew your name, did not just walk away. The next day, the knot in her stomach proved to be a premonition. Her shift ended late, the sky already bruised with the colors of sunset. When she got to her car, parked 3 blocks away in a less-than-ideal spot, the rear passenger side tire was completely, unequivocally flat. She stared at it, a wave of exhaustion and frustration washing over her. It was just one more thing. She was fumbling for her phone to call for a tow truck when a black town car pulled up to the curb, its engine a deep, quiet purr. The windows were tinted, impenetrable. For a moment, she froze, the memory of the 2 men from the diner flashing through her mind. But when the back window slid down, it was him. Moretti. He looked just as he had the day before. Immaculate suit, impassive face. You have a flat tire, he stated, as if observing a fact of nature. I can see that, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. It wasn't an accident, he said, and the simple statement landed with the force of a physical blow. They're watching you. Get in the car, Ava.
This was not a request.
It was a command, delivered in the same tone he had used to dismiss the 2 thugs. Her mind raced. The police. She should call the police. But what would she say? That a man she didn't know had told her that other men she didn't know had flattened her tire because she pretended to be his daughter? It sounded insane. He seemed to read her thoughts. The police cannot help you. They can file a report. They cannot stop a bullet.
Get in.
She looked from her useless car to his waiting one. Her world, the one with tow trucks and cranky landlords and plans for community college, seemed flimsy and thin. His world, sitting behind tinted glass, felt solid and terrifyingly real. Staying here on this street corner felt like a gamble. Getting into his car felt like a surrender. She walked to the car and opened the door. The interior was dark leather and cool, conditioned air. It smelled like him. She slid onto the seat, and the door closed with a heavy, final thud. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving her old life behind with a flat tire on a darkening street. Where are you taking me? She asked, her voice small in the vast, quiet space. He did not look at her. He looked straight ahead, at the city lights blurring past the window. Somewhere safe. I was safe before I met you, she shot back, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. For the first time, he turned his head. His eyes held hers. No, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. You were lucky. There's a difference. The place he took her was not a penthouse, but a discreet brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The apartment was on the third floor, elegant and impersonal, furnished in shades of gray and cream. It looked like a luxury hotel suite that no one had ever lived in. This will be yours for now, he said, setting a single key on a glass coffee table. No one will find you here. The refrigerator is stocked. There's a phone on the counter. It only calls one number.
Mine.
She stared at him, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. This was not a ride home. This was a cage. A very expensive, very comfortable cage. For how long? Until I have dealt with the Falcone problem. And who are the Falcones? She asked, crossing her arms over her chest. And who exactly are you? He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She expected him to evade the question, to give her another cryptic warning. Instead, he answered her directly. My name is Marco Moretti. The Falcones are a rival family. They believe I have encroached on their territory. They are using this belief as an excuse to eliminate me and absorb my operations. The men in the diner were sent to deliver a message, and if I had been alone, to deliver me to their boss. You, by being there, became a complication. Now you are a witness. In their eyes, you are a loose end. The words were spoken calmly, as if he were discussing a business merger. But she heard what he was really saying. A loose end. Something to be tied up. Permanently. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why help me? He walked to the window and looked down at the street below, his hands clasped behind his back. The posture was rigid, controlled. My older brother, Leo, was killed 5 years ago, he said, his voice losing some of its hard edge. He was not in the life. He was a teacher. He met me for lunch one afternoon. A car from a rival family followed me. They mistook him for one of my men. A case of mistaken identity. He paused, and the silence in the room was heavy with the weight of his unspoken grief. I was supposed to protect him. He was my brother. He was in my care. I failed. He turned from the window, and his eyes were dark with a pain so old and deep it seemed to have carved itself into his soul. I will not fail again. You are under my protection now, Ava. That is absolute. Ava sank onto the edge of the sofa, the fine wool of his suit jacket brushing her arm as he stood near her. She understood now. This was not about her. This was about him. About a ghost named Leo. She was a chance for him to rewrite the ending of a story that had already ended in tragedy. A proxy for a debt he could never repay. That knowledge should have made her feel used. Instead, strangely, it made him seem human. It was the first crack she had seen in his marble facade. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. She stayed inside the silent apartment, watching the city live its life through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marco appeared each evening, bringing food from restaurants she had only read about. He never stayed long. He would ask if she needed anything, his questions clipped and formal. He would inspect the apartment, checking the locks, the windows, his movements precise and economical. He was a warden checking on his prisoner. But sometimes, she would catch him watching her when he thought she was not looking. There was a strange intensity in his gaze, a mix of calculation and something else she could not name. During one of their stilted evening check-ins, he found her sketching in a notebook she had found in a desk drawer. She was drawing the view from the window, the intricate patterns of the fire escapes on the building opposite. He stood behind her, silent. She could feel his presence, the warmth radiating from his body. "You're good," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. She shrugged, not looking up. "It's just a hobby. My brother Leo," he said softly, "he used to paint." She stopped sketching. She did not know what to say. The mention of his brother was a fragile offering, a piece of himself he had laid bare. She turned to look up at him. His face was shadowed, his expression guarded, but his eyes held that same deep, aching loss. In that moment, he was not a mafia boss. He was just a man haunted by a ghost. A week into her confinement, it happened. She was standing by the window, watching the evening commuters rush home, when she saw a familiar figure on the street corner below. It was one of the men from the diner, the shorter one with the thick hands. He was trying to be casual, leaning against a lamppost, but his head was tilted up, his gaze fixed on her building. On her window. Ice flooded her veins. They had found her. Her first instinct was to hide, to shrink away from the window. Her second was to call the police. She reached for her cell phone, her old link to a world with laws and emergency services. But her hand stopped. What would they do? Send a squad car? It would drive by, the man would disappear, and then he would be back. Marco's words echoed in her head. The police cannot stop a bullet. There was another phone in the apartment, the one that called only one number. Her choice was clear. It was the choice between the world she knew and the world she was in. With a trembling hand, she picked up the sleek, black phone from the counter. She pressed the single button. It rang twice before he answered. "What is it?" His voice was sharp, all business. "He's here," she said, her voice tight. "One of the men from the diner. He's on the street. He's looking at the building." There was a pause. Then, "Stay away from the window. Do not open the door for anyone. I'm on my way." The line went dead. She stood in the center of the silent apartment, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done it. She had made her choice. She had called him. She had chosen his protection, his rules, his world. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that there was no going back. Therefore, she was no longer just a witness. She was part of the problem he had to solve. Marco arrived in less than 10 minutes. She did not hear him come up the stairs. The first she knew of his presence was the quiet click of the key in the lock. He stepped inside, his face a cold mask. Behind him were two other men, built like mountains in tailored suits. "Where did you see him?" Marco asked, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for threats already inside. "The corner," she pointed. "By the lamppost." He went to the window, careful to stand to the side, out of sight. He looked down for a long, silent moment. "He's gone," he turned back to her. "But he was here. They know the location." The finality in his voice was chilling. This safe house was no longer safe. "We're leaving," he said. He gave a sharp nod to his men. "Get her things." She had nothing. A toothbrush she'd found in the vanity. The clothes she was wearing. The men moved past her, their presence filling the space, their efficiency silent and unsettling. They were not packing for her. They were sweeping the location, erasing her presence. Marco's hand closed around her upper arm. His grip was firm, not painful, but unyielding. He pulled her toward the door. "Stay close to me." They did not take the elevator. They took the stairs, moving quickly and quietly down the back service exit. The air in the stairwell was cool and smelled of dust and concrete. He was in front of her, his broad back a shield. One of his men was behind her. They were a cocoon of quiet lethality. In the alley behind the brownstone, another black car was waiting, its engine idling. He opened the back door and pushed her inside, following right behind her. The door shut, plunging them into the muted silence she was beginning to associate with him. As the car sped away, she looked at him. His jaw was tight, his focus absolute. He was a general whose fortress had been breached. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, we change the equation," he said. "They made a mistake coming for you. They think you are my weakness. I will show them that they have just created a new one for themselves." He took her to a penthouse that overlooked the entire city. It was a palace of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the cozy anonymity of the brownstone. This was a statement, a throne room. From here, he could see everything, and everyone could see him. It was not a place to hide. It was a place to fight from. That night, one of his men brought him a phone, a cheap, disposable burner. "From the alley," the man said. "The Falcon scout must have dropped it when he saw us coming." Marco took the phone. He was about to hand it off for his tech people to deal with, but Ava found her voice. "Let me see it." He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "I worked my way through 2 years of college doing data recovery on the side," she said. "For a little repair shop in my neighborhood. People brought in broken phones, corrupted hard drives. I got good at it, It was a piece of her old life, a skill that had no place here. But maybe it did. He studied her for a moment, then handed her the phone. See what you can find. She spent the next 2 hours working, the city lights a glittering backdrop. The phone was password protected, but the lock was clumsy, easy to bypass. Inside, she found a treasure trove. Text messages, call logs, locations. A full picture of the Falcone operations movements for the past week. They were sloppy, overconfident. She found a series of messages about a shipment coming into a warehouse on the Red Hook docks. The messages were lightly coded, but the meaning was clear. It was a big deal. And it was happening in 2 days. She showed it to Marco. He read the messages, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something that was not calculation or duty.
It was respect. This is good, he said.
This is very good. His men used the information to plan. The penthouse became a war room. Maps were spread out. Timelines were drawn. Ava sat on the edge of it all, a ghost from another world. She had crossed a line. She had not just called him for help. She had actively participated. She had taken a piece of enemy intelligence and handed it to him, knowing what he would do with it. She had become an accessory. The thought should have terrified her. But what she felt instead was a strange, cold sense of belonging. The night of the planned raid on the warehouse, the tension in the penthouse was thick enough to taste. Marco was leaving. He stood by the door, dressed in black, the tailored suit replaced by something more practical, more lethal. He turned to her. You will stay here. You will not open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand? She nodded. He hesitated for a second, his eyes searching hers. Ava, he said, and the way her name sounded in the quiet room was an event in itself. It was no longer just a name. It was a statement. When this is over, he did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. He left, and the silence he left behind was heavier than his presence had been. She was alone with the city lights and the knowledge that men were going to get hurt, or worse, because of a phone she had unlocked. She walked to the vast window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She could not see the docks from here, but she knew what was happening. His world was violent and brutal, and she had just helped him wage his war. She told herself it was survival, but it was more than that. Somewhere along the way, his fight had become hers. His survival had become inextricably linked with her own. Hours passed. The city began to quiet down. There was no news. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing. Then, just before dawn, she heard the key in the lock. Marco entered. He was alone. His clothes were disheveled, and there was a dark smudge of grime on his jaw. But he was moving with a calm, deliberate certainty, the air of victory. He stopped in front of her. It's done, he said. The shipment is ours. The Falcone operation in this borough is broken. Relief washed over her so intensely her knees felt weak. Are you hurt? He shook his head. They never saw us coming. Thanks to you, he reached out, his fingers gently touching her jaw, his thumbs stroking the line of her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than command or control. This was different. It was a question. An acknowledgement. I told you I could not let you go, he said, his voice a low whisper. That is no longer true. She looked up at him, confused. After tonight, the Falcones will be in disarray. They will not have the resources to come after you. You are no longer a loose end. You are free. I can have one of my men drive you anywhere you want to go. Give you enough money to start a new life. He was offering her an exit. The door to the cage was open. She could go back to her world. Or what was left of it. She could try to piece her life back together, pretend none of this had ever happened. She thought of her tiny apartment, her waitress uniform, the smell of burnt coffee. It felt like a lifetime ago, a life that belonged to someone else. She looked at the man in front of her, at the quiet power in his eyes, at the world of danger and loyalty he represented. It was a terrifying world, but it was the only one that felt real anymore. And what if I don't want to go? She asked, her voice quiet but steady. A flicker of surprise, of something vulnerable, crossed his face before the mask slammed back into place. "This life," he said, his voice rough. "It's not for you. You don't get to decide that," she said, her chin lifting.
Ida.
"I chose to call you. I chose to help you. And I'm choosing to stay." The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything that had happened. The diner, the flat tire, the ghost of his brother, the phone, the choice she had just made with open eyes. He took a step closer, his body eclipsing the city lights behind him.
He was all she could see.
"To stay is to belong to me, Ava," he warned, his voice a low growl. "There is no halfway in this world." "I know," she whispered. That was the confession. Not of love, but of something deeper, more dangerous. An acceptance. An alignment. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a brand. A claim. A sealing of a pact made in the shadows. It tasted of gunpowder, victory, and the end of her old life. When he pulled back, he took her hand. He slid the heavy gold signet ring from his own pinky finger and placed it on hers. It was too big, but it was warm from his skin. It was not a proposal. It was a coronation. "What is mine?" he said, his voice absolute. "I protect." She looked from the ring to his face, and for the first time, she saw him smile. It was a small, grim thing that did not quite reach his eyes, but it was there. It was the smile of a king who had not only won a war, but had found his queen in the ruins. She was no longer a waitress from a diner. She was a part of his world, for better or worse. And as she looked out at the sprawling, sleeping city below, she knew she would not have it any other way.